Welcome to another episode of the Alley Report, part of the Service Department. Today we are talking with Gage Stoneman of Dark Moon Home Video, creator of movies we wish we could see. Uh, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and if you could just sum up like the mission of Dark Moon Home Video,
Mission statement. Um,
the dreaded mission statement.
I guess, yeah. I mean, you basically said it. I promote movies that never existed. The greatest movies never made is usually how I put it. It's just a lot of goofy stuff. I don't know that there's much beyond that. We promote I guess that would be the way I'd put it. We promote the greatest movies never made. They're all made up by me, and then I make poster art for it, for poster and box art.
I love it, like the Moon Wolf, and
Yes.
I also thought the Internet Ate Grandpa is kind of like an accurate, like for all of us, our grandparents fell down conspiracy theory rabbit holes. That one just is
Well,
it's pretty
it's
accurate.
super it's super funny because so like Internet Grandpa I made I made it in like 2016 or 2017, and it was one of the first things I made, and it was a very like this is before I was better at Photoshop, and it was a very simple cover that I pulled from, and it was not properly optimized. And then in 2020 I redid it, and when I redid it I wrote a synopsis, and I just had exactly what you said in mind when I was writing it. It was just, well, how does the internet eat a grandpa? Is like really what it came
It's just
came down
with
to, and I was
Facebook.
yeah, and it's like, it just the internet eats your grandpa by making him not your grandpa anymore, not in
Yeah.
any like noticeable way. And it's like, oh, that's happening a lot to a lot of grandpas. So
Yeah. Just a ball of rage.
yeah, it's just it's a lot, I think the internet eats a lot of people.
Yeah.
So it felt very apt, I guess, at the end of the day. Oops, what did I do? Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. Um, but I
Okay.
I love the old school VHS aesthetic to it. Like even down to like a Moonwolf, it almost looks faded. Like it was one of those that sat on the shelves near the window for long enough that
Yeah.
like it got faded a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes that happens with the printing too. I'll yeah, I I try really hard to make stuff that feels pretty authentic to the time. Um, but there's gonna be anachronistic stuff with it, but a lot of the vibe is, yeah, I really do want it to look like you found it in your basement, or in a box somewhere. So yeah, there's a lot of that goes into it.
Yeah, it's kind of there's so many like when I see, older stuff from like, if something gets like a Vinegar Syndrome or a Shout re-release, seeing the
Hmm.
covers where they're all cleaned up and the colors are bright and new, it's almost like, oh, that's not how it's supposed to look. Like,
It's a little weird. I just actually recently got a bunch of Arrow Blu-rays, and they all had like new cover art. And when I opened them, because you always every time I get any kind of physical media, I open it even if I'm not going to watch it right away. I open it and look at the discs to make sure it didn't like fall out and rattle around. And then they have the original art on the back cover slip, so you can just take it out and turn it around. And I did that for all of those just because there's nothing wrong with the new art, but there's just something about that
yeah,
old school vibe where it's a lot of just like isolated images on black backgrounds, and I really enjoy that stuff. Like the
yeah.
floating heads is cool, but it's not as, I don't know. There's
But like
something
it,
there's something kooky about the process by which they came up with a lot of those that I really enjoy.
yeah, I'm thinking of like
Um
the Unborn with like the pram just on
yeah,
the black background. That's it, and it's kind of off to the left. And
yeah, or like dolls with
yes,
the two eyes. And actually it's funny because the whole impetus for me doing this stuff is that I read and I read something, or I heard something where Stuart Gordon was talking about how he was talking to Charlie Band from Full Moon, and they had the dolls. He had the dolls poster just in his office or something like that, where he saw it and he was like, "Oh, what's that? What's that about?" And Charles Band apparently said, "I don't know. Do you want to write it?" So like he had this process of just making posters and having them and then figuring out what the movie was after. And that's more or less what my process is now. Is it goes title, anything I can think of for like the actual key art, and then it's just figuring out how just getting from point A to point B backwards is usually how it how it feels. So
I love the idea of the posters first because so many of like the
yeah.
Empire movies had these epic posters, and a lot it's not that they didn't always live up to the promise of the
No.
poster, but I feel like it's a
Oh
lot of the
God,
low
no.
budget 80s things. Like,
Absolutely not. And it's like Empire. I love Full Moon, but like Empire into Full Moon is definitely like the sweet spot where you had a lot of the budget that Empire started with, and then it turned into Full Moon, and it still had a decent budget before it started just going direct to video. And then you had more of that the poster art not really living up to what the movie was promising. Like I can think of the last like four Puppet Masters where it's just like the scope was really big, but there was just not
yeah,
much there for budget.
yeah, and then like you see like the first one, and there's not much happening in it, but it just looks so good. Like they had the money.
Oh yeah,
Like,
we recently watched the first three Puppet Masters, and I forgot how much of a fever dream the first one feels like, and
yeah,
then the second one is all gas, no brakes. Like just out the gate we're just doing crazy zany shit and it all looks so good, and then the third one I think has the biggest budget, and it's so I forgot, it's so interesting because I remember the third, fourth, and fifth ones being really family friendly, but then you watch the third one and it's like all of the violence really contradicts a lot of like the violent beats in three hit so hard, and then everything else in three is very like the puppets are good guys,
yeah,
like, but then there's just all like I just remember the last scene where the guy gets hung up in in that he's it's really brutal. And that's like, oh, that's where all the budget goes is into those effects.
it's funny you mentioned dolls. I feel like that movie. So like I saw a little bit of it. It was one of those like I was really young, like 4 or something, and my parents were watching it, and I snuck out.
Yeah.
Um, and that one freaked me out for years because my grandmother collected dolls, and she had a doll room, which was this room where it
Oh,
was floor to ceiling, all the way around
just
dolls,
all
and
dolls.
then all these bigger dolls like on the ground that like she would take clothes that the grandkids wore and put them on those dolls. So that movie just
Yeah.
terrified the shit out of me, and I recently
Oh,
rewatched it,
that.
and then it's like, oh, the dolls are good guys. Like the people are
Yeah,
the bad
yeah.
guys.
It's so
I had it
funny
all wrong.
how it's so funny how much of when you really boil it down, how much of Full Moon and Empire was just freaky little guys running around as the it's like that. There's freaky little guys in subspecies, there's freaky little
Hmm.
guys in Puppet Master, demonic toys. Uh that whole I really would like them to go back to that model. I really miss
Yeah,
I
yeah,
I
like
miss I miss front and center freaky, just little freaks. Give me little freaks. I love.
yeah, and like Gremlins,
Yeah,
the Ghoulies movies, like Critters, like the same
critters.
thing.
Yeah,
Like I love little monsters that pose a
yeah.
bigger threat than you'd assume.
Yeah. It is funny how much of the how much of my enjoyment of those old movies just comes down to how creepy and weird the little guys are in them. So
Yeah, like I love seeing like puppets in action. I love when they do the switch from puppets to stop motion, and you can
yeah,
tell there's like they've put a little background in. I don't know. I love
there's
all that. I love those little
the
imperfections of the switch.
yeah. I don't know. There's just something like yeah. There's just something really to that. There's something so tangible to the old way we used to do stuff for, or the well, I don't make movies, but the way they used to do stuff in old horror movies, it just felt it's very fake, but it feels more real. I don't know.
Yeah,
There's something about the it feels tactile,
yeah,
which I really enjoy.
like rewatching The Gate. When they the end
I
when the big
also
monster comes out of the floor, it's like
yeah,
you can tell he's the puppet. it's so silly in slow motion when the rocket like goes into his abdomen, but I still like
Yeah.
it better than any of the CGI stuff. I buy it more.
I I had just the thing is like I had just rewatched I don't think I've watched The Gate when I was a kid, so I watched it with me and my wife recently, and there were several shots where I went, how the fuck did they do that? I don't know how they did, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
there's the shot where I don't know, there was just I remember several shots like where I was like that's great. There's like that tornado shot of
yeah,
stuff happening, and it was I don't know, it was crazy, and it's like you just buy it. I think your suspension of disbelief kind of disappears when you can tell that it's the thing is taking up physical space, even if it is a miniature. You can tell that
yeah.
it did exist at in some way, shape, or form. So it's and then also there's the whole I miss painted backdrops a lot, like
Yes.
the from Star Wars and stuff, because it's like it's that same feeling. If you feel like it's there, like you feel like you're actually looking at something, even if it doesn't feel quite right. Whereas with CG, it's I don't know. It's the more we get into entire CG movies, it's like yeah, I guess it feels real, but then there's stuff where it's like, why did you CG that? Why didn't you just go to a street?
Yeah.
You
Like
know,
I
because
think
there's
of like that it was one of the recent Marvel series, the one with Nick Fury in it. And there was a behind the scenes
yeah,
shot of him like green screen background in a green screen chair and he's holding like a fake green screen gun. Like not even the
it was
props are
very
real.
yeah, it was very odd. And then you look at the final shot and he's just in a room. Like, I don't, and I understand that there's like, yeah, maybe that was a reshoot and they didn't have the room for the day or, there's a myriad of reasons why they would do that if they couldn't just get him in a room. But I just feel like that's just poor planning that at that point. Like, but yeah.
Yeah, I like the wizardry of it.
Yeah, there's something to that old school there's just something to the old school approach that I really miss in a lot of movies, but especially in horror. I think we're getting a lot more low budget horror movies now, though, that aren't relying so heavily on that. Like, got like the entire X series,
Yeah,
uh, that just was just out. Like there's just a lot of stuff that's feeling more like that old school approach to these things, and I'm really glad that we're at least in
yeah,
horror we're getting that.
yeah.
Action movies I think are long lost cause at this point.
Even like Psycho Gorman, I love that because it just felt
Oh,
like they enjoyed having like anything they could to have the physical creatures on set. And
I love Psycho Gorman. There's something, yeah, I think if you look at any of the stuff I make, I feel like Psycho Gorman has like a very when I read about Psycho Gorman and eventually saw it, I was like, man, that just sounds like something I would have come up with to do for
yeah,
it's like very rooted in a time and a place, and it feels very much it's just hyper violent Power Rangers, and it was very very fun for me. I just recently watched The Guyver also, and that's another one where it's like if David Cronenberg directed the Power Rangers, that's what that movie feels like, and I loved every second of it, even though it's it's not a great movie. There's a lot of weird shit in it, but
see, I haven't seen that yet.
oh, you should definitely check it out. The cover's gonna make you think Mark Hamill's the main guy. He's not. But if you don't know anything about it, you're gonna look at the cover and see Mark Hamill, and then the suit. Like, I have it somewhere, but I don't want to get up. My dog's right behind me on the floor. But that the marketing of that movie was crazy, where it just made it seem like their biggest name was the main guy, and he's not. He's like a private eye for most of the movie.
I love when low budget movies do that. It's always like it was made this year, and then I think there was one like a few years ago where it was like Jesse Eisenberg had like a walk on role in this horror movie. He's barely in it, and it was just
Yeah,
kind of canned until he became famous. And then they put out the poster and
yeah.
the cover art, and it's just his face on it. Like it's like he's in the movie for
Uh,
30 seconds.
Texas Chainsaw: The Next Generation. It
Yeah,
was yeah, it was Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger, and then they uh they decided to put it out, and they were like they apparently both of them were trying to get them to not put it out because it wasn't a good movie,
yeah.
and they were in it a lot, but it was before they were names like
Well, I saw this interview. It was maybe a year or two ago with Renee Zellweger where they asked her about it, and she said that her management tried to kill it, and she argued with them about it because she was like, I loved making it. I
Oh,
had a
really?
great time. It was like my
Oh,
first
okay, cool.
experience with like a big budget movie. Like she was just having all these
Yeah, yeah.
stories about like there's like an RV on set, and that was what everybody's dressing room was. So it's like everybody taking turns getting
Oh, yeah.
changed in the RV, and she's just like, it was
Well,
magical.
well, that's great. I'm glad. Because that's the thing. I think and Matthew McConaughey is going absolutely apeshit in that movie, and it's like,
Yes,
it's
yeah,
it's great. I love big performances like
yeah.
that. You can't get enough of that.
Especially that's the
That
kind
well,
of
I'm glad.
movie where you have to do a big over the top.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's like everything Jeffrey Combs is in. He's playing so big and it just works. You know what I mean? Because that's just an
Yeah,
actor who understands the material he's working with and knows. Same thing with Nick Cage. Nick Cage is also somebody who just goes big every time.
yeah,
Or,
and like he said in this Reddit interview where they talked about his performance and being over the top, and he said if you're paying for a movie, I want to give you an experience. I don't want you to feel bored or
yeah.
that you wasted your money. He's like, so I'm
Oh
always
yeah,
going
for
to
sure.
be over the top, and it's like I appreciate that. Like,
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like he's getting your money's worth. You pay for him, he's gonna make it worth your time, and that's always great. I love that.
yeah, I saw Renfield recently, and like I was like he did great.
Oh, he's the
He was
best
chewing
part
the
of that movie.
scenery. Yeah, he was like he knew.
Yeah.
He's like guys, this is Dracula. Like, got
I
to go over
yeah,
the top.
it's one of those things where I remember seeing Renfield too, and I was like, it's not really my cup of tea because it has a lot of the stuff I don't like. I'm not like a huge horror comedy guy. I say that, and I wrote a thing called The Internet Ate Grandpa, but like the way my approach to that was always it's always yes, the thing I said is a joke, like gas station sushi is another one I made up where it's like the title is a joke. And then when you read the back, I want it to be as much of a coherent story that feels like it could be good because there's nothing
Yeah,
behind it. It's all hot air. So I want it to feel like it could maybe be a good movie that has a ridiculous title. And then a lot of horror comedies just tend to be comedies with blood in them, which is
yeah.
fine. It's just not particularly my I don't dislike them, but it's one of those things. And Renfield had a lot of that, but on top of that, I think I would have liked it better if there had just been less CG blood because that was a
That
big.
was so
There
distracting.
was that
It's
whole
like,
fight scene where it's just really distracting, and it's like I could get behind most of that movie, but like Nick Cage was the best part, and I mean I love Ben Schwartz, but Ben Schwartz at the end as a familiar too, I was just like I don't know, man, I don't know. This
well,
feels
it was one of those. I feel like they concentrate on the wrong areas. Like they had this big drawn out fight scene, and it's okay.
yeah.
And there's a shot where Renfield's just talking to Dracula in his apartment, and he's trying to stand up for himself. That was way more interesting than the fight
That was
sequence.
so much better. I enjoyed that. I would have watched an entire movie of Nick Cage's Dracula just bossing that guy around.
Yeah,
I know that I don't know what the forward momentum would be for the movie to be like to actually like go, but like yeah, I just love the idea of this toxic relationship being the center of it and less action movie stuff. But you gotta put butts in seats, so I get
yeah.
it.
See, I think like when you mentioned like with your stuff, you come up with a title, but then you're like, I need to make a thing that actually stands behind it. I feel like
Yeah,
that's the key to a good horror comedy. So when I think of ones that work, I think of uh, Frighteners and Bubba Hotep.
yeah,
And because I feel
yeah,
like there's like the title sounds silly, the concept sounds
yeah.
silly, it is not treated silly. Like these are
No,
real characters, they have arcs, like
yeah, and I think and it's like I have the same view of like stuff like Sharknado and other stuff
see I
where
can't yeah, I just
I
can't
can't get into it. It's this idea of we're making something ridiculous, so let's be ridiculous, and it's like cool, but I think it's like there's that thing I don't know if there's like a meme where it's like the reason that like Muppet Treasure Island works is because Tim Curry is is a man playing a Muppet, and the reason that the Muppet Christmas Carol works is because Michael Caine is a man who's pretending all of the Muppets are not Muppets. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
you have
like
to
plays it deadly serious.
it plays it so serious and it allows for everything around him to be crazy. And then in that same instance, everything around you being crazy and you adding to it works too. But like stuff like Sharknado, where it's just like it's just like this is dumb. Let's make this as dumb as possible. And I'm like, no, you should try work backwards.
Yeah,
Start with something that feels good and then let it be weird. Like let it like, and then same with horror comedy, I think you should start with the horror, start with what's actually
mhm,
scary, and then build funny moments around it. It's why there's tons of comedic beats in horror movies at all the time. But
yeah,
we don't consider them horror comedies because horror and comedy have a very set up punchline, but it's set up scare, set up scare, set up scare.
yeah.
So it's like there's a lot of DNA in both, so I understand why people want to mix them, but I feel like most of the time horror comedies end up being comedies with horror elements, whereas I to me a true horror comedy is a horror movie with comedic elements, just more than
Yeah,
a normal horror movie has. Like
yeah.
I'm
I
trying to think of a good example. Uh I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I know there's I
because
know there's good examples.
it's like I love them when they work, but it is
Yeah,
such a difficult balance. It is, and
it
because
is.
I've seen ones that came close. Like I really liked what's I'm blanking on the name, but it's like something something versus evil, where it's these two hillbilly guys out in the woods.
Tucker and Dale versus
Tucker and
Evil.
Dale versus
Yeah.
evil. I feel like that was mainly a comedy, but I feel like it was one of those. There's a few tweaks, and it could have been perfect.
I see, and I very much feel the same way. There's a lot of people who say that that one's their favorite horror comedy, but I fall in the camp of like, well, it's a comedy, and
Yeah,
where it becomes a comedy is the fact that we are switching perspectives back and forth between these just two guys who are just trying to, you know, fix up a cabin, and then these kids who like the things that work about it are the them being so out of sorts with the fact that these
yeah,
kids keep coming up and these horrible accidents keep happening that make them look guilty. But where I think it falls apart is we're spending too much time. There's too much mixing of those elements. Like
yeah.
they rescue the girl from drowning or whatever, and then she's just with them the whole
See, I
time
feel
as
like
like an audience surrogate.
I
That's
feel
where
like
it
that's
falls
where
apart,
yeah,
right? Because now we don't we there's just it's just this element of there's something funny about us seeing them from the perspective of the kids where every one of those moments should have been very like horror movie coded, but because we just had a scene where we watched him stumble into the room and try and give her tea, it's undercut a little bit to where
yeah,
it's like, well, that, I mean, obviously we can't. It's like the first couple scenes where he shows up at the gas station and they're freaked out because he's laughing uncontrollably, trying to be cool, and then he goes back. All that stuff works. It's just after that last bit where it's like we're having way more scenes of both of them talking to somebody outside. If it was just those two talking and being very confused about what was going on the whole time, I think that movie would have been better.
yeah. Like
Like
I like picturing
or a
she's
better
the
horror
final
comedy.
girl.
Sorry.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
she's the final girl and survives, but she doesn't realize she never really escaped a threat. Like the
yeah.
misunderstanding continued to the end. Like
It's funny. It's funnier to have misunderstandings continue to the end rather than and having her be the final girl and realize, wait, what? You guys aren't trying to kill me at the end. I think being a little bit more of a punchline that rather
yeah,
than I don't know that one guy just becoming a serial killer at the end was very I don't
I
know.
mean,
I
because
it
imagine
was out of nowhere a little bit.
Like Tucker and Dale survive, but they're horribly burned and scarred, and so the sequel is just them trying to
Yeah,
get their lives back together. It just keeps
yeah, it's
happening.
the
They keep
same
ending up
thing
being the
happening. Yeah,
villains.
you could, yeah, you can definitely yeah, like you said, I think it's a great comedy, but I hesitate to call it horror because there's not at no point do any characters we care about actually feel like they're in danger because we don't care
Yeah,
about the kids throwing themselves into wood chippers on accident. It's just slapstick comedy at that point, but a little bit more realistic slapstick comedy.
yeah. I feel like the Frighteners to me is the because it takes that Tales from the Crypt model
Yeah.
because Tales from the Crypt could be really
Oh
creepy and
God, I
funny.
love Tales
Like
from the
it
Crypt. Yeah.
yeah. I feel like it hit that balance. Like you said, it's a horror movie with comedic elements. That's the
I think
balance.
I think if you're gonna make a horror comedy, you should 1,000% shoot for the tone of like an EC Comics
Yeah,
story. Because a lot of those had very scary imagery and then very comedic stories because they were comics first. You know what I mean? You had to have jokes for for the most part. And Tales from the Crypt stories are all they all have insanely funny comedic moments. Like
Yeah.
they are all almost all of them are horror comedies. At least it feels like that to me. And yeah, that's it's great. Oh, God, I really want them to bring. I don't know if they want. I don't know if I necessarily want them to bring back the show, but I would really love it if they would just put it on a damn streaming service or something.
Seriously, like I
Like
signed
I'll
up
buy a box set.
like when it was still HBO, like I signed up for like the thing for it because I was like, ooh, it's HBO. I'm gonna get Tales from the Crypt. I'm gonna be able to stream it. It's
Yeah.
not gonna be grainy
Nope.
YouTube rips. Nope, not on
Yeah.
there. Not at all.
Nah, I don't know. Yeah, it's I have a couple of tapes. That's why physical media is so important.
Yeah,
I
I've been
cannot
picking up
stress
where
enough.
I can.
Yeah. I cannot stress enough. I think a lot of the reason why I do what I do is because I just really love physical media. And um there's something more interesting to me about VHS tapes than like DVDs or Blu-rays. Uh because the analog nature of it, it feels closer to a book. Like a VHS tape feels closer to a book both when it sits on your shelf and also just the fact that like you can pick that up, take the cover off and look and that spool is the movie you're watching.
Yeah,
Like there's a very physical, real thing that has that movie on it. And then there's, you know, when with DVD and with Blu-ray, it's just it doesn't feel as tangible. It's like it's that thing we were talking about with the effects. It's the same
yeah,
feeling. It just it feels more tangible. And it's like, yes, it has its flaws. Your VCR will eat your tape if you're not careful to keep up with maintenance and stuff. But there's like a I compare it a little bit to vinyl, and I feel like more lately it certainly is feeling like that, where we're having more people who are getting into collecting VHS tapes and are more interested in the medium in general. And it does feel a little bit. There's that little there's just that little bit of difference in watching something on VHS, and it's like it's probably just nostalgia, but
I
it
don't
does
know. I
feel
feel
different.
like some older, like especially low budget horror movies that have been put on VHS that were from like the 70s and 80s. I feel like it was a way of almost masking imperfections. So when these
Oh, for sure.
films get like upgraded and oh we've
Hmm.
digitized them, they've got a 4K upgrade. All of a sudden, like all the mistakes are on stage. All of a sudden, the effects
Yeah, you
don't look as good. You can see the lines for the makeup, and it was
yeah,
meant to
and
be
it's like
grainy.
some of that stuff too. It's like it adds to the charm. Sometimes it can. Like I know that they did like a Blu-ray release of Evil Dead
Evil Dead.
that got rid of the corners around the moon. You know, there's that shot of the moon and it's
Yes,
very
yeah,
clearly comped in and you can see the edges. Even on VHS, you can see the edges of the moon. They got rid of that. There's a scene where I think Robert Tapert is just in the shot when they roll through and they digitally got rid of him too. And it's like, well, okay, well, like, how much of this is, you know, don't you know,
don't ruin the
don't buff
magic.
out
Like
all the scratches, man. They're like, you know, like you hardly
that's
ever
kind of the
noticed
fun
them
of it.
before.
Like
Yeah,
literally,
yeah. It's like that's it's low budget filmmaking at the best. Like, you know, there's the warts and all approach to a lot of horror.
yeah, because
Independent
it's
horror movies is great.
yeah, that's how I pitched it to my oldest because she's wanted to watch horror movies. I was like, Evil Dead. I was like, it was made by these two guys with no money in the middle of the
Yeah.
woods. I was like, and it's great. They're trying their
Yeah.
best to make the scariest movie ever made. And
I
since that, the mistakes are enjoyable.
yeah, exactly. There's I you know, it's like same thing with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. A lot of these
Yeah,
movies have that the story behind them being made and you're like, wow, it's crazy that two
yeah,
people it's inspiring because you go, wow, anybody can make one of my favorite things with no money, with no prospects of getting it sold or moved anywhere, and then it just spirals into this huge thing that has a bunch of sequels and has a bunch of studio money behind it. I remember I got the Ultimate Edition DVD of Evil Dead from Hot Topic for like $60 or something like that, and I watched all of the special features on it, and it had a ton of like it had documentary about making of, it had like interviews with all the cast like at that time, uh reflecting on it, and then it was I watched that DVD a lot, and one of my I remember it was the only movie I've ever done this with where I put it in, I watched it all the way through. I didn't have anything else going on for like the evening, so I just hit play again and I just watched The
Watch
Evil
the Evil
Dead
Dead.
twice in a row, like without,
Yeah,
and I don't do that very often. I have ADHD. I move around a lot. I don't like to stick with one thing over and over again. But yeah, it's a great movie, and I part of the greatness is understanding what it went into making it, and I think that's why I like it so much, and why I like
yeah,
low budget horror movies so much is you can feel the effort
yeah,
that you
yeah.
don't feel it on other movies as much.
And that's another thing, that effort. That's like, we mentioned Sharknado. That's why when people are like, it's a bad movie on purpose, it's like, that's not fun.
That's
That's
not
not
fun. It
enjoyable.
isn't.
It's a bad movie where, God damn it, they tried their best, and this is
Yeah,
what they did. And it's one of those, even if I'm laughing at it, it's still like,
yeah.
they made a movie and I didn't. Like, they did
Yeah,
it. They set out and made it
exactly.
happen.
They set out to make something good. It did not turn out good, but I respect it more than something that went out of its way to shoot itself in the foot immediately,
Yeah,
right? Like the I've we talked about it a lot, like me and my wife, where I'm like, I'm almost more annoyed when a big budget movie is almost good more than if it was just out and out bad. Like if
yeah,
there's enough stuff there where I'm like, this is interesting, and then it just completely unwinds itself at a certain point, or just does enough stuff wrong to where I'm like, this movie is so almost good, it almost offends me more than if I just watched something
yeah.
that was bad start to finish. Like Stay Alive, the evil video game movie. I remember being like, wow, this movie's almost pretty good. And then you watch something like Darkness Falls, which is just garbage, and I it's just trash, but it's like I have a little bit more fun with Darkness Falls than I
Yeah.
do with Stay Alive, because Stay Alive is almost good, whereas Darkness Falls is just trash start to finish. Like,
Trash start to finish, and also the monster is like an actual physical puppet thing, and I always appreciate
Yeah,
that. Where it's like,
yeah.
hey,
There's
they made a
there's like
thing.
less of that. Stay Alive came out in the era where that demon, the face
Yeah,
was starting to get big, and it shows a little bit. But it's the only horror movie Disney's made, I think.
I didn't know Disney made that.
Well, a company they acquired made it,
Yeah,
so it wasn't like they actually made it. But I don't remember
yeah.
where I heard that. I think it was a Mr. Gigi video, because I think he reviewed Stay Alive at one point. I don't know if you're familiar with his channel on YouTube at all, but he's been reviewing a lot more horror stuff, which is great for
Right.
me. I love it when people who aren't necessarily like entrenched in the horror scene start reviewing that stuff outside.
Because you see it draws
Yeah.
them in. Like I feel like anytime somebody does that, it's like, oh, you're about to become a fan. You don't realize
Yeah,
it.
exactly. It's
You
you
watch the
can see the
turn.
wheels turning. Yeah, you can see the wheels turning where they're like, I think I like this. And then it spirals.
Yeah, like talk about intent. That's why I love Trolls 2 so much, because the people
Oh
that made
yeah.
it were like, we're making a statement on vegetarianism. It's like, okay, I mean,
I don't
it's completely off the rails.
somebody had that idea to start with for sure. But I don't know that it's very properly communicated. God,
That's
I
not
mean,
fair. Like,
it's been so long since I watched Troll 2, but it is a perfect ideal of this is a terrible movie, but it's so bad that it winds its way back up. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like
it's so absurd. And even the
it
first
comes
one
all the way around.
that they did a sequel
Yeah,
to,
Troll.
it's pretty good. It's a pretty good movie. It's the same. It's that thing
Yeah,
about where it's like it's pretty good. And but then the second one is just so off the rails, but
it
not
has
on
nothing to do with the
purpose.
first one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I make that joke a lot too when I make something a lot. So like I'll do a sequel to a thing, and I have this so it's like I did Internet 8 Grandpa and I did Internet 8 Grandpa 2, and rather than like having any returning characters, it's always a different person who's like the main. It's like because I take that approach. I usually will model, if I'm gonna do more than one, like a one-off, if I'm gonna make a franchise, I model it after an existing franchise. So it's like Internet 8 Grandpa is like my Nightmare on Elm Street,
Ah.
where, the first one comes out and then the second one comes out and it's not really connected to the first one at all, but there's and then
So the third one's got to
I
bring
did
back some people.
third one's definitely like, yeah, we're bringing back the other grandkid, or like the
Or like
grandkid from the first one.
the Howling series. There's like zero continuity. Like
There's just
good
nothing
fucking
between
lucks.
it. And then
Like
I
Tasmanian tigers at one point. There's like it's
yeah,
absurd start to finish.
exactly. And then like I just did I did the most I've ever done is I've done 4 movies, and I did that bastard skeleton.
Oh,
And
I love
that bastard
skeletons.
skeleton, I modeled it after, not necessarily after, like, so the loose premise is it's very much like Hellboy meets Hellraiser, kind of, was like the idea of, you summon a demon that helps you solve a case, and and also Pumpkinhead, so like your soul is tied to it, so everything it does goes on your permanent record, aka your soul or whatever. And I modeled that series after, not the Hellraiser series, but like the production timeline of the Hellraiser series,
Yeah,
where the first two have the original author of the novella attached in some way, and then the third one, he's like just an executive producer, and then the fourth one he had nothing to do with and didn't want
yeah,
anything to do with it, that kind of vibe, where it's like, the amount of lore I make up for the productions on these, and it's almost all in my head. I did do a zine explaining a lot of that on my website um a while ago, just because I was like, I have to get it out of my head, because it's taking up so much useful space.
I
So
love
it's
that.
like,
I love it so much.
oh,
Um,
it really does inform a lot of the stuff I make, which in a way, it's like I never thought it would. It would just be a thing where, but it's like, it helps a lot when you're thinking of like, well, who would come back? Like, can I find
yeah,
a picture of this actor I used on the back to use on the back for another one, or should I just drop it and do a complete, it really does help in making multiple of a thing, which I don't do a lot of, because
yeah,
it's tough to to think of. It's tough enough to think
yeah.
of one thing. It's hard enough to then come up with 4 or 5 sequels for it. Like,
Well, I think it's amazing that you did that. You have the Bastard Skeleton in the series, and yeah, I love that people watching or listening. You gotta check out the zines. In addition, check out Dark Moon Home Video. Check out like the Bastard Skeleton, everything else, but also read the zines so you can see the lore. And
yeah, like, because yeah, it's
thank you again for coming on here, man. This has been
yeah,
awesome.
absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. This is a lot of fun. I really like talking about horror
Oh,
stuff. So
same here.
yeah. Oh, I obviously that's why you have the show. So
Exactly.